This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show. Now I am joined by Barry Habib, who is the Chief Executive Officer of MBS Highway. He's an American entrepreneur, and the mainstream media, all of the media, goes to him for his expertise in both the housing and mortgage markets. He's the author of the #1 best-selling book, Money in the Streets. He's actually the man widely credited with saving the mortgage industry in 2020 from margin calls due to actions by the Federal Reserve. It was his presentation to the Fed that actually created stability at a critical time for America. This man knows more about the economy than anyone I've ever met, and it is my privilege to welcome Barry Habib onto the Roger Stone Show.
It is such a pleasure always to be with you, Roger. Love everything that you put out there. I'm one of your biggest fans.
Barry, I'm really glad you could make time for us on this beautiful Sunday. Joe Biden's State of the Union, he touted our current economy. In his TV commercials, he says it is the strongest economy in American history. They point to the unemployment rate. They point to the inflation rate. They point to the GDP as evidence of his claims. But based on our conversations, everything is not nearly the way he says it is. In the beginning of the show, I went through a long list of the increase in costs for everyday Americans, everything from the cost of natural gas, the cost of electricity, the cost of baby food, the cost of groceries, and those are all undeniably up. At the same time, real average weekly wages are down at 4.2%. And then you taught me this: if you look at the gross national income index, you will see that wages have been flat. So unpack this economy for us. Let's start with the unemployment rate.
So the unemployment rate, it's a very, very important measure. In fact, I hear people all the time, and I was just listening earlier, everybody's focused on inflation for the Fed to make its decision, and they're correct that it's extremely important because the Fed does watch inflation, and what they're watching is something called the personal consumption expenditures, and that's called PCE. They look at the core rate of that, which just simply strips out food and energy prices, because the Fed says, hey, we don't really have an influence on that. But what the Fed's saying is we want that to be convincingly moving towards 2%, with their target being 2%. We're a little bit above that right now. We're at 2.9%. And while it will trend lower, that last mile to get to 2, I've done the calculations, it's going to be hard for that. And as the market's starting to realize that it's hard to get to that number, we're seeing less anticipation of Fed rate cuts. The market was saying, hey, maybe we'll get 6. Now it's going to be 3, they're saying, which is in line with what the Fed told us in December. But on March 20th, we'll get a new number. But people forget that the Fed has this other mandate, which is called maximum employment. And that's why what you're bringing up here is so insightful, Roger, and to point out that I think the best ticket to see the Fed cut rates will be the unemployment rate. It is currently at 3.9%, and it has moved up from 3.7 in the last report to 3.9. Now, here's the thing. We're 0.5% above the cycle low, which we saw in April of 3.4. The reason why this is so important is because it is an extraordinarily reliable recession indicator. Recessions, we know that we're in a recession officially like 8 months or 10 months or a year after the recession. Oh, yeah, well, the U.S. entered a recession back then. But this indicator will tell you when you're actually starting to see the beginning of the recession. Now, in order for it to be rock solid, we need to remain at an average of 3.9 for the next couple of months. I think we'll get there. But that will confirm that we are, yes, in a recession for sure. So when you talk about the Biden economy and unemployment, I agree with you. The two are very closely tied together. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office, which is very smart, they see the unemployment rate going to 4.4%, which would 100% say we are in a recession in 2024. So listen, things can change, but I am in alignment with this, and we could break it down further, and I'll explain to you why, because a lot of the numbers we're getting from the BLS on jobs, it's baloney. I don't really need to get negative on the BLS because they are understaffed and they are underfunded, but the numbers are just unreliable that we're getting from them.
So when Joe Biden and his administration constantly point to the stock market and consumer confidence as evidence that we have a robust and vibrant economy, how do you respond to that?
Well, there's an enormous high correlation between stock performance and consumer confidence. Enormous. So if the stock market's good, people see their 401k is doing good, people say they're more confident. It's a wealth effect. And also the housing market, which is the largest asset that more than two-thirds of Americans have, that has done extraordinarily well. So it gives people a little more confidence. You know, my home's gaining in value. But it can be disconnected to the actual economy. Let's remember what is driving the stock market. It has not been a broad-based move higher. You know, people said, oh, it's the Magnificent Eight, then the Magnificent Seven. Now it's like 4 stocks essentially driving much of what you see going on in the stock market. The rest of the stock market has not really been participating in this. In fact, the Russell 2000 was in a bear market until just recently, meaning that it was down by over 20%. So the breadth of the market, the breadth of the advance is very limited, and it's being driven much by this AI craze that's been going on and the anticipation of it. These parabolic moves historically, like we've seen, typically come back down to earth. So I think that there's a masking in consumer confidence of what's going on. And getting back to the employment numbers, you know, you see a big number come out, a jobs number come out. Oh, we 353,000 jobs. This is all imputed data. It's not real data that you're getting. It's all modeling. And the modeling, Roger, is baloney, because you can look at where you do get actual data, like from folks at ADP that measure 10 million payroll records, real hard data instead of using models. And their numbers tell a completely different story. Even when you take the BLS itself, when they survey people, when they do the actual survey, that's where you get the unemployment rate. Here's what we see for the last 3 months. We have seen a loss of 1.8 million jobs. 1.8 million jobs lost. And it even is worse than that, because those are full-time jobs that we've lost. We've replaced them with 900,000 part-time jobs. So, you know, the quality of the work is deteriorating. The hours worked is going down significantly. So all of these factors say there are some deep cracks within the job market. And you started off with inflation, which is exactly where it's at, Roger, because people say, okay, the inflation rate's coming down. How, you know, it's 2.9% of it. But this is a cumulative effect. It doesn't make the inflation of 20+% that people are feeling go away. This is 2.9% on top of the 20%. So the pain being inflicted is to a lesser extent, but it's pain on top of pain that isn't going away. Every time that people go to the grocery store, they feel it. And I think that's why voters are looking at the current set of circumstances and saying, this is not the direction I want to be in.
So talk to us about where you see this going. You know, famously, James Carville said regarding, I think it was the 1996 election, it's the economy, stupid. And I don't understand you don't have a crystal ball, but where do you think we are headed?
To me, I think the economy is already showing signs of cracking. We are definitely in a manufacturing recession. The numbers we got this morning from the New York Manufacturing Index were awful, way beneath expectations, but that's been the same with all the regions. Kansas City, Richmond, Dallas, Philly, all of these that come out reporting, they've all been quite negative. So in the manufacturing sector, yes, we're in a recession. When it comes to the services sector, we are seeing lots of layoffs. We're seeing that happen. We are definitely in a situation where the unemployment rate moving up will give us at least recession-like conditions. The stock market, very hard to to determine which way it's going. But by historical standards, it is an expensive stock market. And by historical standards, it would lead you to believe that there will likely be a breather that the indices take. So I think that it will be inevitable, in my opinion, that the truth will come out about this economy, that it has been propped up by the Fed's balance sheet. It's been propped up by programs that have been put out there, which did create inflation, excess dollars that from government programs that have kind of staved off the natural state of things, which really would be a contraction, in my opinion. And Roger, the overall economic conditions that we have right now, I think will start to turn slowly towards a more realistic level, which is lower than where we are here.
Now, this is an area of your particular expertise. Where do you see the housing and mortgage sectors going?
I think mortgage rates will come down a little bit, especially as we see a rise in the unemployment rate, and that will be a help to housing, which, housing you have to look at it in two different ways. Housing activity is clearly in a recession, and this is where a lot of people get it wrong, but housing values and prices, these have held up well, and they will continue to rise. I think that home prices, home values will continue to move up. So from an investment standpoint, or if you own a home, you're going to continue to be in very good shape and feel good about that. Or if you get into the housing market, you should do well. Now, of course, caveat here is that every single zip code has its nuances and can be different. Some may under or overperform. But on a national level, we look at about 5% appreciation in 2024. When you think about 5%, you might not think it's exciting, but if you have a home and you put 10% down on that purchase, that 5% actually gives you 50% rate of return on your investment. So it can be very lucrative. In fact, some statistics here, homeowners have a 40% greater net worth than renters, 40x greater net worth than renters. And on average, according to Kiplinger's, 2/3 of all net worth of Americans is in equity in their homes. So it's a good long-term decision.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Barry Habib, the Chief Executive Officer of MBS Highway, widely recognized in the country as one of the foremost experts on the economy, and particularly the mortgage and housing sectors. During his own mortgage sales career, Barry Habib personally originated over $2 billion in mortgages. But an interesting guy, he was also the lead producer and managing partner for Rock of Ages, the 27th longest-running show in Broadway history. He also produced magician Chris Angel's Mind Freak at Planet Hollywood in Las Vegas. So he is hardly a one-dimensional individual. In fact, he's a bit of a Renaissance man. Barry, what kind of games can they play prior to the election to prop up the economy? We've already seen the Biden administration dip into the strategic petroleum reserves. There seems to be no end to their pushing the Fed to just print more money. What can we look for in that regard?
So it's a great question. So a couple of quick points to bring up, because I think it's important. You mentioned the consumer, and I was a bit remiss in that I should have brought up the fact that the buy now, pay later boom is something we should really keep our eye on. During 2023, almost 90 million Americans, remember, of the 340 million Americans, some are not even of age to spend. So 90 million Americans use buy now, pay later. The average ticket price was just barely above $200, which means if I can't make a $200 purchase and I have to put it on buy now, pay later, what does that say to the health of the consumer, which everybody's touting is so healthy and so strong? Here's the other thing, and Roger, this is perhaps the most troubling, that over 10% of consumers use buy now, pay later for groceries. And that in and of itself is something that is a very scary thing to think about. Is, if I can't buy the groceries as my basic food essentials and I have to put it on buy now, pay later, is the economy that strong, or is the consumer that resilient? I'm not so sure. What can the Biden administration do? Well, the Fed, let's hope that they don't have influence over the Fed. And I think that, if anything, the Fed may be, to some degree, apolitical. Jerome Powell is a Republican. However, he hasn't been the biggest Donald Trump fan. But by the same token, I don't think he has any allegiance whatsoever to Joe Biden, due to the fact that Joe Biden did not want to reappoint him. Joe Biden wanted to appoint Lael Brainerd, very, very, very liberal, very left-wing. But in the end, Jerome Powell won out. So he doesn't have any allegiance to either. So maybe he's going to be apolitical, but from his perspective, he's got to say, hey, look, it's 2 years, my term is over. The last thing I want is to go down as the worst Fed chair in history, which many people were saying about him, because he did keep rates too low, too long, too much quantitative easing. It would be a bad legacy for him, which is why he's being so hard-nosed in trying to make sure that he gets inflation pretty close to that 2% target. There is something that I'm worried about, and very few people talk about it, and it is the way that the Fed is handling its balance sheet. So every month, about $90 to $95 billion from the balance sheet runs off. It was at $8.5 trillion. It's at $6.9 trillion now. Just huge sums of money. And that would normally really slow the economy down. But the economy has been kind of cushioned because of something that very few people know about. It's called reverse repos. And without getting too detailed, it would be as if I were a consumer and I went to a bank and I said, hey, you know what? I want to put some money in someplace safe, in some CDs. But at the time, if I felt the Fed was going to be hiking rates, which was the case, a year or so ago, then maybe I don't want to put my money in a CD because I'd be missing out on future rate hikes. That means I could get a higher rate in the future if I waited. But rather than just wait for that higher rate, is there a place I could park my money? And the bank says, yes, it's a money market. Well, when you have huge banks making investments, it's analogous to this, but it's different instruments. Instead of a CD, it would be treasuries. And instead of a money market, they use this thing called a reverse repo. So there was an incredible amount of money that banks wisely put in this reverse repo, because every time the Fed hiked, it went up. And they got up to almost $2.5 trillion. But once the Fed signaled that we were done with hikes, then these banks widely started to pull money out of these reverse repos and purchase treasuries at higher yields. They bought the 10-year treasury at 5%, the 2-year treasury at almost 6%. So they made wise decisions and locked in those higher rates above where they are now. The problem is that they've sucked out from the $2.5 trillion, over $2 trillion of it. There's about $440 billion left. And here's what's going to happen. In the next couple of months, that $440 billion will run dry, in which case you may see a crisis develop. And that crisis could be evident perhaps in our banking system. And we've already seen some, remember the Silicon Valley Bank and the Signature Bank and the First Republic, we averted a crisis by saying, hey, here's $420 billion in a facility, which expired just a couple of weeks ago, but that staved that off. But there could be another big crisis brewing. I'm worried about this, and it is around the corner once we see this reverse repo dry up. The answer may be for the Fed to say, hey, we're going to slow down or taper the runoff of our balance sheet to add more liquidity. And if they do, that should wind up helping interest rates drop, and that should help the housing market.
Talk to us a little bit about wage growth. In other words, I pointed out that real average weekly wages were down 4.2%. We've got about 2 minutes, and then we'll be back with Barry Habib. Barry, what about wages?
It's very smart that you say real wages, because real wages, what that means is after inflation. So it's true that you could be making more money, but if inflation is eating all of it or more than what you're getting, then your real wages are down. Now, just recently, just in the past few months, we have turned the corner where real wages have turned positive, but it doesn't erase what has happened. We're seeing right now real wages in a positive state, but that's because inflation's down. If you're staying at your job, your income right now is rising at about 5% per year. If you're a job switcher, which means that someone's enticed you to move. That's closer to 7% per year. So switching jobs. But what's key here is that these numbers have come down precipitously. Those switchers were at 16%. The stayers were at double digits. So they've come down a lot. Now, inflation's come down rapidly, too. But what we are seeing is that wage growth is still there, but it is much more tepid. And we are seeing the quit rate. The last point before the break, for me, quit rate is down to levels we have not seen since 2005. And that means that the quit rate tells you, hey, I'll quit my job if I see greener pastures. It tells us that there's less opportunity to entice people to leave their current situation and move on.
Folks, this is the Roger Stone Show. We're talking to my favorite economic guru, Barry Habib, and we will be right back.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
You've created a cool indoor retreat. Now let TriPeaks provide the quiet and energy-efficient comfort you can depend on. With a range of innovative cooling solutions, like the Carrier Infinity Heat Pump, that delivers premium home heating and cooling performance. Learn more at TriPeaksAir.com. You make it a home. Let TriPeaks make it more comfortable. Rebates, incentives, and financing are available for a limited time. TriPeaks and Carrier. Turn to the experts.
Welcome back, folks. This is the Roger Stone Show, and we're talking to Barry Habib, the Chief Executive Officer of MBS Highway, recognized by many in the financial sector as the leading expert on both the mortgage and housing markets, but also a man whose views on the economy are always fascinating and incredibly on the money. Barry, is our current economy really not just a manifestation of the spending orgy that this administration has been on? Talk to us about the national debt and whether this is sustainable.
It's definitely not sustainable, Roger, and you are correct. It is a manifestation of a deficit-induced growth. It's the same thing for consumers as well. So even if you take it to the consumer level, credit card debt has ballooned by $270 trillion, and that is a very significant number because it represents over a 20% increase in the amount of credit card balances that people are carrying. Now, pile onto that the fact that the rates on those are, in the mid-20s, depending on the source you go to, somewhere between 22 and 26% average interest rate that people are paying on this. These are not your smartest places to have debt, but yet people are doing it. So I don't have an explanation, but I do know that the well tends to run dry. Let's all remember what credit is. Credit is a future purchase that would have happened in the future that you bring forward to today. It creates economic activity now, but the debt load of carrying it creates a burden on you that throughout history will cause you to buy less in the future because now you have the debt service, that burden that limits your ability to spend more money. It's the same thing with the government. I broke it down with the consumer just to give us something that we could relate to, but it's the same with the government. And the government, as you very aptly put, has been in a spending frenzy. Our debt has increased rather a scary manner. Because what we have seen is, our deficit just this one year is going to be $1.6 trillion in a year. Our overall debt is $34 trillion. These are way above anyone's estimate. And, when Joe Biden gets on there and says, not on my watch, that is just simply kicking the can down the road. That, at some point in time, we need leadership that's going to have an adult conversation and say, listen, Social Security, nobody wants to talk about this, Roger, but do people listening, do you know that there's a mandatory, this is in the rules, this is law, 23% cut in Social Security benefits in just 8 short years if we don't fix it somehow. Now, that's scary. And this will be the leading campaign debate, I think, in the next election, not in this one, but as we get closer to it, as it becomes inevitable, unless it gets fixed, there are ways to fix these things. There's ways to fix the debt. I don't know that you can do it just I know you can't do it by just saying, hey, we got to raise taxes. That won't do it, because what people never think about is the deterioration of the economy based upon people now not spending, and then you get lower tax receipts, even though you have a higher tax rate. So, but by the same token, maybe there are things that should be considered that, without doing too much damage, can raise revenue. So I'm not saying that you can't have some sort of a compromise, but yes, the spending has to be looked at, and we have to get that under control. There is, this, hey, look, it's a short-term thing. I will just try and gain votes like we've seen from the Biden administration by free student loans that we'll pay for, or whatever it is that, and like the latest one from the Biden administration is insanity. It is, let's provide $400 assistance for first-time home buyers. This is the stupidest thing you could possibly think of on so many accounts, not only because, A, we don't have the money at our disposal to do it, B, it will not change anyone's decision whether they're going to be a home buyer or not for $400, and C, the most amazingly foolish thought process is it shows that there is zero concept of how the housing market works. The housing market, the problem with the housing market is not that we have too few buyers. It's that we have too little inventory. We have too many buyers with too little inventory, and that's what's driving prices higher. If you want to make it more affordable for people, what you should do is, instead of over-regulating builders, instead of making it cost too much to build homes, you should have builders be subsidized to build homes for first-time home buyers. That's where the problem is. But what his proposal is showing total ignorance, because what he would do is exacerbate the problem. We already saw this playbook from Mr. Obama back in 2010, and it was a disaster. What he did is provide a tax credit for first-time home buyers. And what it did, it created a big spike in purchases at the time, but once it ran dry, it caused home prices to plummet. And those individuals, those poor people that he was supposed to be helping, what they saw happen is they said, oh, I got a tax credit, but then my property value depreciated much more than the tax credit I gained, and therefore those poor folks were then underwater and lost their homes. What Mr. Biden is looking to do is along that same line of thinking. I'll do something that gains votes, that sounds sexy, that people get behind, without any regard for whether it makes sense or whether it will help the economy or help those individuals in the long run.
All right, with about 2 minutes to go, I just got this text message. It says, Mr. Habib seems very smart. Please ask him what he thinks about investing in precious metals such as gold and silver in our current market.
Full disclosure. I am a big gold fan. I have personal investments in gold, so I want to tell you that first. Okay, so full disclosure. But I would tell anyone that if you have any doubt whatsoever in the amount of money that's out there being a little bit overdone, and then gold is a great place to be. Gold is something that, it's been said throughout history. An ounce of gold should buy one ounce of gold should buy a fine quality men's suit. That kind of relationship has been held together throughout history. And I think that gold prices will continue to go up. I am also a technician, meaning I look at technical analysis and charts. I think it is quite possible to see the price of gold continue to move up from here by at least another $100 or so from its current levels. It's 2162. I see about 2280 as the next resistance level. So I think that gold is a very good investment. It's been performing well. Of course, you have the digital gold version of Bitcoin, which has done extraordinary. And with the halving coming up, that's another option there. It's certainly not for the faint of heart, and it has moved up quite a bit. So you have to wonder, is that potentially ready for a pullback? But I do love gold as an investment.
All right, we have to leave it there. I want to thank Barry Habib, the Chief Executive Officer of MBS Highway, for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show. Thank you for joining us, Barry.
Thank you.